surpassingly wise, surpassingly great, he who saw the deep, the country's foundation, who knew the ways, who knew all things, Gilgamesh. Softly, as pre-dawn starlight still trembles above the horizon, the ancient words float across time. They arrive without trumpet or drum, only the hush that precedes sunrise on the empty plain where the Euphrates once wandered in sandy meanders. Of the city's walls, they say, climb upon Uruk's rampart, walk about the city, inspect the foundation platform. Are not its brickwork burnt bricks? The prologue invites us to consider not merely a king, but a place formed of baked mud, reed mat, and patient shaping hands. It urges us to remember that the hero's footprint is made of fired clay, no less than his people's cottages, and so the story belongs to all of them, and perhaps to us. Welcome, gentle traveler, to Hearth of Heroes. You have found a small harbor of quiet stories where legends unfold at the tempo of a night breeze. You may be listening from a lamp-lit study, from a commuter train, from a distant coast, or from the soft perimeter between waking and sleep. Wherever you are, consider leaving a note in the embers below, letting us know from which corner of the world you tune in. Your presence helps the old tales glow a little warmer. Tonight we begin the first of 10 calm wanderings through the Epic of Gilgamesh, tracing the journey from imperious monarch to seeker of everlasting life. Let the bustle of the day recede, let thoughts settle like silt in a canal. Let us walk out to greet the faint pink blush on the far edge of the Sumerian sky. Dawn over Uruk arrives silently, carried on the wings of ibis and whispering reeds. In the half-light, the monumental ziggurat of Anu looms above the flat plain, its terraces wrapped in a cool exhalation of nighttime earth. The city itself resembles a great ship, moored between desert and river, its kiln-baked bricks shining faintly gold as though they remember the furnace. From an elevation, perhaps from the rampart that Gilgamesh himself ordered extended, one can watch the day awaken in measured stages. First comes a smear of apricot along the horizon, then the quiet bleating of goats penned within mud-plastered yards. Finally, the gradual hum of kiln fires rekindled, blacksmith forges fanned, and market awnings unfurled. But all of this stirs beneath a stillness, a thrum older than traffic and coin, a pulse that tells the body it stands at the birthplace of cities. Archaeologists brushing sand from clay cones and beveled rim bowls have tried to imagine the full sprawl of Uruk during its zenith around 3100 BCE. By the era when Gilgamesh may have ruled, perhaps 6 or 7 centuries later, the city was already ancient. End to end, its defensive wall stretched almost 10 kilometers, encircling 90 hectares of temples, workshops, and houses. The Anu ziggurat, whose earliest core predates writing, had grown layer upon layer, each new generation refurbishing the ascending terraces with fresh clay, raising the summit ever closer to the glittering domain of the gods. At its base sprawled the White Temple, a place of processing priests and animal offerings, where niches glowed with lamp oil and alabaster eyes stared eternally. To the south, a second sacred precinct honored Inanna, sovereign of love and war, signified by the Inanna ziggurat. Though later kings would rebuild it, its early form already pierced the sky like a mountain spontaneously thrust from alluvial soil. Nearby workshops produced delicate cylinder seals bearing lion eagles, rosettes, and mythic banquets. Canals threaded outward from this holy core, slicing the terrain into fertile island-like districts. Flat-bottomed boats drifted along them, laden with barley, bitumen, and copper, from lands whose names are now barely legible on fractured tablets. In the dawn hush, one can almost hear water lapping against hulls made watertight with tar, the creak of rope fashioned from palm fiber, and the laughter of fishers emptying woven traps. The wall itself, the very masonry that the prologue urges us to walk, was more than fortification. It was narrative. Each brick bore a stamp reading Gilgamesh, son of Lugalbanda, asserting a lineage that reached back to gods disguised as men. Those stamps still appear when archaeologists turn over broken fragments. The dry river wind whistles through missing courses, yet the royal name endures. Imagine masons standing thigh-deep in mortar pits before sunrise, mixing straw and clay while the night's last stars fade. They would have heard the booming of copper pegs hammered into foundations, the call of overseers enumerating loads of brick, and perhaps the chant of laborers pacing themselves with song. In their harmonies, the ideology of kingship took practical shape. The ruler is shepherd, guardian, provider of order, and the wall embodies his promise. Kingship in Sumer circa 2700 BCE was less crown and scepter than cosmic assignment. The Sumerian phrase for kingship, lugal, binds the words big and man. Yet that bigness was spiritual. The city's well-being depended on the king's ability to mediate between earth and the capricious world of the divine. He performed rituals, waged wars sanctioned by omens, allotted labor toward temple building, and presided over the distribution of grain. Should famine or flood strike, it was a sign that the bond had loosened. Thus, when early oral memories described Gilgamesh as a tyrant who pressed young men into endless construction, they were critiquing not an autocrat alone, but a fracture in the covenant of stewardship. They were saying that the bricks, magnificent though they were, could not substitute for justice. Over the centuries, that oral critique traveled in marketplaces, night fires, and the rhythmic pulse of reed flutes that lulled fields of laborers. Storytellers embellished, trimmed, and re-embroidered episodes. They called the hero two-thirds god and one-third human. They gave him a wild rival, enkidu, shaped from clay by the mother goddess to check the king's arrogance. They whispered of journeys into cedar forests beyond the sunrise, of gates that groaned open at the world's edge, of immortal flood survivors guarding secrets. Every retelling softened or sharpened certain angles, much as river currents gradually polish a shard of pottery. Yet the core remained, the wall, the city, the restless heart that learns to mourn. Cuneiform preserved these shifting sands. Around 2000 BCE, perhaps a millennium after Gilgamesh breathed, a literate scribe pressed a stylus into soft tablets and captured a version we call the Old Babylonian text. Later, in the library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, a Neo-Assyrian scholar assembled a 12-tablet masterwork that scholars sometimes nickname the Standard Edition, opening with words that literally translate, "He who saw the deep." Those wedges of clay, many broken by time and accident, were eventually buried by war and earth. When 19th-century excavators unearthed them, they found silence encrypted in angled impressions. Once the code was cracked, an oak-paneled study in London echoed again with the voice of ancient Sumer. In the hush of an evening in 1872, George Smith reportedly leapt from his desk, astonished that Tablets Qun contained a flood narrative sharing uncanny parallels with the Book of Genesis. The rediscovery electrified scholars, but the tale itself asked only that we listen. Whether inscribed in clay, murmured in reed huts, or whispered into earbuds now, its plea is the same. Remember the wall, remember the city, remember how a man learned that life, like clay, hardens when fired by loss. The epic's survival was almost accidental. Clay, when baked by firestorm or palace conflagration, turns ceramic and endures. Paper burns, parchment decays, yet shattered tablets wait patiently in ruined chambers. Each fragment of Gilgamesh is thus a message in a bottle addressed to tomorrow. Archaeologists piece them together like shards of a dream, reading syllables that halt mid-sentence, leaping across gaps with scholarly speculation. Where a line reads, "Companions rested, night came, the stars," a lacuna follows, and then shone down on their sleeping faces. We fill the blank with our own starlight, unconsciously becoming co-authors. Tonight, under our shared hush, take one measured breath and picture the fresh morning over Uruk. The canopy of sky widens, light slides down the weathered flanks of the ziggurat like water over stone. Somewhere, a temple gardener plucks a date, tastes its honeyed flesh, and marvels that such sweetness swells from silt and sun. Schoolboys scratch signs onto practice tablets, vertical wedge, corner wedge, diagonal wedge, the alphabet of gods and accountants. A priestess drapes herself in a mantle dyed striking lapis blue, preparing to recite hymns. And at the city's gate, ordinary souls haggle over fish, millet, and bitumen, scarcely aware that centuries hence their clamor will be inferred from pottery density in a trench. Meanwhile, the royal palace stands crowned with woven reed matting, its facade inset with clay cones glistening like mosaicked petals. From a high balcony, the young King Gilgamesh surveys his domain. The legend says his gaze is proud, searching for new labors to test mortal limits. Yet perhaps, in a forgotten instant, he also sees the humble dawn pooling over rooftops and feels a flicker of tenderness, the seed of a quest he does not yet comprehend. We, looking back, might call that moment the real beginning of the epic, not the first swing of an axe in the distant cedar forest, but the first inward tremor that asks, what endures? As sunlight now settles gently upon your listening space, allow these early images to linger. Think of kiln-warm bricks beneath bare feet, the resinous scent of freshly cut cedar destined for temple doors, the muted swirl of canal water reflecting clouds like sleeping sheep. Think of the stylus tapping out destiny, one subtle wedge at a time, each impression both fragile and eternal. And think of how the epic, like the city, is built of layers, some bright and accessible, some buried, all waiting to be rediscovered whenever memory grows curious. You are invited, friend at the hearth, to carry these layers into your dreams. If you wish, share below where you listen from. Together we recreate the map of ancient trade routes in modern voices. Your words will mingle with the rustle of reeds and the scratch of clay, reminding us that stories live only when heard. When next we gather, the air over Uruk will have warmed to midday, and we shall meet a wild man whose feet know no hearth and whose hair sways like field grass. Until then, may the tranquil glow of first light rest upon your brow, and may the walls of your own dwelling stand firm through the night. From the stillness that settled over Uruk at dusk, we drift a little further back into the hush that followed the city's first raising of its white limestone walls. In that lingering image of stone cooling after sunset, we find the shadow of a singular figure, Gilgamesh, the king whom scribes would remember as 2/3 divine and 1/3 mortal. The clang of chisels still echoes faintly, but now the focus narrows to the blood that courses through the ruler who ordered the fortification. It is blood unlike any other, bright with the promise of gods and weighted with the faults of men. So the story turns, soft as a reed shaken by river breeze, from the city he built toward the mystery of the one who reigns above it. In ancient tablets, his lineage is spelled like a riddle etched between starlight and clay. His mother, Ninsun, is a cow-eyed goddess of wisdom, a gentle voice among the high gods, known for dreams interpreted beneath cedar shade. His father, Lugalbanda, once a mortal king, earned a measure of divinity by deeds sung through long corridors of time. Yet the arithmetic that makes their son 2 parts god and 1 part man refuses easy resolution. Priests measured with fingers against the sky, and poets let the fractions stand, as though to suggest that even within the strict mathematics of fate there lingers a remainder no one can divide. Gilgamesh himself carried that remainder under his bronze-studded breastplate, a sense that ordinary rules bent around him like reeds in floodwater. The gift of near godhood was substance wrapped in seduction. Strength poured through his limbs the way sunrise empties over horizon. He could run with wild antelope, wrestle lions in thorny ravines, and lift stones 10 men together could barely roll. Such power, granted too soon to a spirit untested by restraint, festered into tyranny. The walls he ordered had been built under whips cracking above exhausted shoulders. The ramparts that glimmered in moonlight were mortared with the sighs of conscripted fathers. In taverns hidden behind fig trees, citizens whispered that the king did not sleep. Instead, he prowled rooftops looking for daughters whose weddings approached, claiming the first embrace before any husband, reading the old law only to twist its words until they crowned his appetite. Day after day, Uruk thrummed beneath feverish construction. Canal banks were raised, storehouses enlarged, temples coated in lapis plaster. Every project shimmered outward like concentric circles on a pond, always returning tribute to the single throne at the center. Laborers no longer sang rowing songs. Their throats were hoarse from edicts barked across scaffolding. Mothers nursed infants while shaping bricks. Boys too slight for hammers fetched baskets of bitumen by torchlight. The city's growth was a marvel, yes, and yet the marvel bore a bruise. The more the skyline rose, the more hearts sank. Even the date palms drooped, as though they sensed roots draining faster than they could drink. Among the elders a murmur formed. Greatness pursued without measure invites a desert of spirit. Above, the heavenly court watched. Inanna, radiant in star-spangled garments, leaned upon a cloud of perfume. Shamash, lord of the sun's daily march, narrowed his bright eyes at the dust swirling unchecked below. Anu, oldest of them all, felt the weight of cosmic order tremble. as though Gilgamesh's unchecked will were a misplaced boulder, straining the levee between mortal striving and divine law. They had blessed him with might so that Uruk might flourish, but flourishing had become bondage. The hum of complaint rising from streets now mingled with prayers flung upward like sparks. Each petition pleaded not for harvest or rain, but for relief, from toil, from fear, from the ceaseless hunger of their radiant yet relentless sovereign. Within the palace, marble lions guarded corridors scented with cedar resin. Yet even there, murmurs slipped like mice beneath doors. Advisors, chosen for obedience, lowered their eyes when the king strode past, though they steeled themselves against trembling. Gilgamesh sensed unease but mistook it for awe. The line between homage and dread had blurred beyond his noticing. He recited his catalog of achievements, walls that rivaled any, libraries stacked with tablets, granaries sleek with surplus. Surely, he thought, achievements justify method. But when night settled and musicians packed their flutes away, he would walk alone among columns, and somewhere beyond the reach of torches, he felt a hush that no victory chant could fill. The hush grew into dream. One night, lying upon a mattress stuffed with fine wool, he saw the stars tumble from their ordered courses. A massive meteor crashed at his feet. When the dust settled, the stone stood upright, shaped like a man, and its brightness equaled his own. He tried to lift it, but it was rooted deeper than any cedar. In the dream, Ninsen appeared, touching his brow with cool fingertips. Her voice slid between thunder and lullaby. "Your match approaches, beloved son. Pride is a door that soon will find its key." He woke drenched in sweat, yet even then refused to consult the temple interpreters, fearing that meaning might shorten the horizon of his will. In the high courtyard where cattle were offered, Ninsen herself lit fragrant reeds and whispered toward the vault of heaven. She saw the bruise behind her child's splendor more clearly than anyone who walked in sandals. She pleaded with Shamash that the approaching remedy be swifter than destruction. For remedy was needed, one shaped not of plague nor famine, but of companionship, a mirror bright enough to reveal to the king the lines of sorrow cutting beneath his own eyelids. Among the gods, the conversation thickened like storm clouds over a copper sea. Voices overlapped, and within that overlapping a design took shape. They would send a wild counterpart, equal in force, opposite in temperament, to wrestle the tenor of power back toward balance. For the moment, however, Gilgamesh moved through his day unaware of that gathering answer. He inspected barracks, counting spears. He approved a festival in his own honor, then levied another tax to pay for the torches. Overseers bowed as he passed, yet their shadows lingered behind them, thin and resentful. Children playing in alley dust paused, watching the bronze-clad sandals stride by, then returned to their games with quieter laughter. Dogs slunk against walls, pigeons scattered from arches. All living things seemed to chart their movements around the royal wake, as river reeds part for a barge whose oars churn careless of what lies below. That evening, the court poet recited the ancestry of Gilgamesh before assembled dignitaries. Born of Ninsen, the poet chanted, "He gleams like newborn bronze. Descended of Lugalbanda, he carries cunning in the marrow of his stride." The crowd dutifully hummed assent. Yet beneath the gilded ceiling, a few listeners exchanged wary glances. The more the poet lingered on godly favor, the more the hall felt stifled, as though divine proximity had become suffocating. Somewhere between the syllables of praise, a single question pulsed. What happens when a mortal wrapped in such power forgets the fragile third that keeps his feet upon earth? The question drifted out of the banquet window and up into the garden of the gods, where it joined the earlier petitions. Thus, consensus formed. If Gilgamesh would not look downward, they would send upward to meet him a being shaped of clay and dream, raised among gazelles, answering the call of water holes and moonlit steppes. While potters in Uruk fired jars, potters in the heavens prepared a different vessel. Fingers of divinity pressed sinew and breath together, molding wild hair, broad shoulders, unscarred heart. They named the form Enkidu, though the name had not yet found its own echo in mortal tongues. Back in Uruk, sleep eluded its king. He paced the parapets, the city lights beneath him flickering like embers, trying to refuse a coming night wind. His thoughts tumbled between exaltation and restlessness. He catalogued the thickness of each gate, the number of cattle penned for dawn sacrifice, the yield of barley. and still a splinter of discontent lodged in his chest. The walls, high though they were, could not contain that splinter. The temples, ornate though they stood, could not sweeten it. Somewhere beyond the horizon, he felt, waited a challenge vast enough to make the voice inside him go quiet. In the cool pre-dawn, mists curled along the Euphrates, and reeds whispered of footsteps yet unseen. Far off, a trapper would soon notice strange footprints beside a watering hole, prints of a creature neither beast nor man, heavy enough to sink the surface crust of mud. That discovery, when sunrise painted the river copper, would begin a sequence no god could halt, for threads had been woven. But on this final quiet breath of night, Uruk slept under colossal walls, and its king, 2/3 divine, 1/3 mortal, waited unknowingly for a meeting written long before his first cry. The torches guttered, and the stars kept their silent watch. From the red glimmering ramparts of Uruk, where Gilgamesh's uneasy dreams settled like dust upon the silent brickwork, our vision loosens and drifts eastward. Dawn has not yet broken. The world is held in that cool interstice where night remembers day. Out beyond the irrigated plain, beyond the ordered furrows and the measured canals, emptiness waits. There the wilderness breathes without walls, and the wind carries no proclamations, only the scent of raw earth. In the sleepy hush we hear another heartbeat, slow and colossal, as though the soil itself were turning over to open an ancient door. It is a door no mason carved. The gods themselves come threading through it, intent on answering the laments rising from Uruk. For when tyrannical restlessness shakes a city, the divine often answers with a mirror, equal and opposite. That mirror will be molded from clay, water, and ungoverned green silence. Tonight, alone, in the mythic hush stands Aruru, old as Tigris silt, young as sprouting reeds. She has shaped many destinies, yet her fingers remain forever moist, forever ready. The pleas of Uruk's citizens whispered at temple altars have knotted together into a single rope of petition, and that rope tugs at the goddess's wrist. She steps to the riverbank, scoops darkness and water, and kneads them in her palm. Clay thickens beneath her nails, taking on warmth, pulse, desire. She does not hurry. Each movement contains centuries, the spin of potter's wheels, the budding of rose bay, the stretch of lion muscle under noon heat. When at last the mixture steadies, she pinches nostrils, lips, lids, and traces shoulders broad enough to carry scent of cattle and cedar alike. No blessing is spoken, no thunder accompanies the act. Only a sigh, like wind sifting barley, reveals creation's completion. In the quiet. Thus Enkidu rises, unclothed but not naked, for furred wilderness wraps him like a garment. His hair spills across his shoulders in tangled rivers. His body bears the dark gold of unfiltered sun. He inhales, and with that breath absorbs the glossary of the plain. Antelope hoofprints, wheeling vultures, the distant cough of an onager. No memory of city walls burdens his brow. Instead, the untamed grammar of storm and starlight aligns his bones. He wanders, and the grasses part willingly. When he bends to drink, water does not ripple with alarm, recognizing a brother element. At night, the constellations descend, nestle upon his chest, and depart again undisturbed. In this first movement of life, he is neither man nor beast, but the still point between. The gods desire balance. Where Gilgamesh presses outward, conquering, Enkidu dissolves boundaries, returning to the source from which bricks were first quarried for Uruk. Consider the space between their births. Gilgamesh emerges from palace chambers, polished by heralds and genealogies, yet restless within stone geometry. Enkidu springs from mud and meadow, content to measure days by migration and moon. They embody a tension older than any treaty, civilization craving the wild it subdues, wilderness dreaming of forms it might one day accept. Where the city stacks bricks, the steppe stacks horizons. Where the temple lists laws, the forest lists scents. Still, neither realm is complete. Civilization without wildness calcifies. Wildness without measure evaporates. Through these two figures, the epic invites the listener to feel that hinge inside each heart, the restless swivel between order and awe. As Gilgamesh's footsteps echoed upon cedar gates last night, Enkidu's echoed upon acacia roots. Their rhythms are halves of one drum, separated so the world can hear the difference, preparing to recognize the harmony still to come soon. Days, spread like quiet plumes behind Enkidu. Animals adopt him with unthinking courtesy. He uproots snares, loosens stakes, and the creatures, sensing deliverance, linger near him unafraid. Gazelle fawns nuzzle his ankles, jackals trail his shadow as though it were cool shade. Hunters notice the change. Their traps lie empty, their nets tangle only wind. Around campfires they mutter of a phantom made of grass and brawn. One hunter, eyes sharpened by worry, carries the tale to the high priest of Uruk. Thus the story returns to walls, curling like smoke under gilded lintels. The priest listens, measures omen against rumor, and sees in it the divine counterweight requested days ago. Action is set in motion, not with spears but with silk. A sacred courtesan, Shamat, is summoned. Her teaching is tenderness, her weapon, patience. She is to meet the wild one where thirst guides every throat at the spring. The spring lies where reeds bow under their own green fragrance. Water gathers there in a mirror smooth enough to remember starlight even at noon. Shamat arrives clothed in soft linen, the color of sunrise through incense smoke. She waits, neither anxious nor proud, letting her breathing match cicada hum, her gaze float upon ripples. Enkidu eventually approaches, guided by droughtless instinct. His feet make no sound, yet she feels a hush fall heavier, as if the world itself pauses to observe. He kneels, drinks, and lifts his face, droplets shining like budded pearls along his beard. Their eyes meet. Contact requires no vocabulary. The air between them ripens, slow and sweet. Shamat offers bread, the first leavened bite he has ever known, and pours ale gold as late wheat fields. Taste unfurls understanding. Boundaries may soften without breaking. Around them, animals withdraw, unsure of the new scent of intimacy. 7 languid nights and 6 tawny dawns they share the shelter of woven reeds. In that tempered seclusion, Enkidu learns deliberate touch, rhythm measured not by thunder but by murmured breath. Each caress plows a new furrow through his wildness, sowing seeds of reflection. When at last he rises, strength still steams about him, yet the animals, once companions, startle and flee. Recognition has shifted. He bears a scent compounded of cedar oil, roasted grain, and whispered names. Shamat, wise in the gentle arithmetic of change, guides him back to the spring. There she cleanses his limbs, combs his hair with ivory teeth, and drapes him in woven cloth, more sky than garment. Clothing does not imprison. It reminds the flesh that shapes other than its own exist. He regards his reflection and sees not a cage, but a path, the shimmer of fresh purpose winding toward distant stone towers. Along the caravan road they journey, Shamat speaking softly of harvest chants, city festivals, and the bell-like laughter of children beneath fig trees. Enkidu listens, curiosity rising like dawn over ridges. His stride retains the looseness of gazelle herd, yet his eyes now narrow, assessing shapes, possibilities. Each mile peels away a veil. The shepherds they pass greet him first with fear, then with intrigue, finally with welcome. They offer curds and cloak, tokens of inclusion. At evening they rest in an abandoned shrine where votive oils still perfume the air. Candles sputter, painting walls with silhouettes of kings wrestling lions. Shamat notes one in particular, a twin-figured carving, back to back, sharing one broad crown. She gestures lightly, an unspoken lesson. Enkidu senses that another heartbeat, neither beast nor holy man, awaits him beyond these foothills. 2 halves, separated at birth, are slowly navigating toward reunion within the tale. Sleeping beside the dwindling candles, Enkidu dreams. In the dream, a single tree bears 2 trunks, one supple with vines, the other squared by carpenter's tools. Birds build nests where branches merge, singing songs that borrow notes from both sky and hearth. When he wakes, he carries this image like a quiet ember. Symbolism walks beside him now, as real as dust. The wild has offered him instinct. The city will offer him memory. Between those gifts, the gods hope to compose a melody capable of guiding empires. For civilization always carries its wilderness folded inside, just as the wilderness carries forgotten blueprints in each seed. Enkidu is the bridge, newly mortared with tenderness. Gilgamesh is the tower seeking sky. Soon their shadows will meet upon the same ground, and in the meeting, every passerby, shepherd, mason, god, will hear the hinge of possibility creak slowly, beautifully, open beneath the quiet sun. As morning unfurls, Shamat and Enkidu reach a rise overlooking Uruk's distant silhouette. The walls gleam faintly, pale embers under the newborn light. Smoke from breakfast hearths curls upward, tracing invisible ladders toward the gods. Enkidu pauses, sensing histories he has not yet lived waiting inside those ramparts. He leans on a staff she has given him, carved from tamarisk, and listens to the low, human murmur rising across the plain. It is neither bird call nor river rush, yet it stirs his blood with equal force. In that hush, he feels the approach of someone whose steps will match his own, echo for echo. The wind changes direction, carrying cedar resin and a clang of bronze. Without haste, they resume walking, each footprint planting a question the city must answer. Somewhere beyond the gates, a king dreams of contests, and the dream will soon awaken to the sound of hoofbeats. In the hush that followed the city's midnight bells, the image of Enkidu standing on the threshold of the great gate still lingered like half-remembered music. Citizens who had pressed their palms to the mud-brick walls during the previous chapter's close remained motionless, wondering whether dawn would bring reconciliation or ruin. The dust he had carried from the wilderness still floated in the torchlight, turning every breath into a slow, gold-flecked sigh. Against that quiet curtain, Chapter 4 lifts gently, as though the scene itself inhales, preparing for the meeting of two spirits shaped by different silences. Uruk greeted first light with wary restraint. Merchants drew their awnings halfway, neither fully open to commerce nor closed against conflict. Water carriers tiptoed across flagstones as if loud steps could hasten disaster. High on the temple terrace, the priests of Anu murmured skyward petitions, their incense plumes curling like slow rivers toward hesitant clouds. Beneath that pale vapor, the wide processional street waited for footfalls that would change its story-battered stones. The king whose dreams reached the vault of heaven was already awake, armor resting across his knees, listening to the murmur of a city holding its breath still. The summons arrived wordlessly. Gilgamesh rose, letting bronze greaves speak in subtle clangs, and paced toward the great door. Outside, Enkidu waited, wild curls damp with morning dew, shoulders glazed with the scent of acacia. Two worlds turned inside their chests, the patterned order of palace courtyards and the unmeasured pulse of grasslands. Neither saluted. Instead, their eyes completed the arguments tongues would only roughen. With emotion spare as snowfall, the king stepped forward. The gate groaned awake, revealing a corridor of sand where the early sun slanted like an adjudicating blade. The duel could delay no longer today. First impact was heard before felt. Cobblestones rang with a percussion older than drums, the raw collision of wrist against wrist as Gilgamesh caught Enkidu's searching strike. Shockwaves rippled through walls, dislodging wagtails from roof beams. Vendors swore later that they saw dust lift as a single sheet, hovering before settling in uneasy ripples. Grip locked into grip, the men described a circle of intent, shoulders grinding, tendons groaning like windlasses dragging full buckets from deep wells. Neither hero summoned weapon or spear, their bodies composed the only alphabet required, consonants of shove and vowel-long grapples of hefted breath together. Momentum shifted the way twilight slips across reeds, gradual yet certain. Enkidu, chiseled by wilderness, drove forward with the memory of antelope sprints. Gilgamesh, tempered by ritual wrestling grounds, yielded half a step, redirecting force into torque. Pavement cracked, hairline fissures mapping the sound of the city's old myths breaking open. Spectators peered from terraces, though none dared cheer. The scene unfolded as sacrament, not sport. One heartbeat, the victor seemed chosen. The next, balance returned like a tide refusing dismissal. Knees dipped, elbows found leverage, and still neither mouth formed a plea or insult. Breath alone narrated struggle there. At last, a turning. Gilgamesh pivoted upon the cracked stone, using Enkidu's momentum to sling the wild man toward the palace pillars. The collision resounded like cedar beams meeting storms, yet Enkidu rebounded, legs coiling beneath him, and lunged anew. Their shadows spun in tandem, weaving an accidental choreography older than courts, younger than sunrise. Then, with a shared exhale, the tide reversed, fists unclenched, gripping forearms instead. The switch was subtle, nearly private. Muscles that had petitioned for dominance now sought measure. Through the echoing dust, they knelt, still locked, but weight changed from conquest to comprehension, and silent grace awakened. The city noticed. A hush deeper than fear erased the marketplace's hum. Pigeons delayed flight. Even the river's froth seemed to slow, as if time, curious, leaned closer. Within that moment's cradle, Gilgamesh met Enkidu's gaze, not as throne to challenger, but as mirror to mountain spring. What each saw disarmed the remaining violence. Gilgamesh recognized wild loyalty unmarred by courtly guile. Enkidu discerned sovereign strength untainted by hunters' snares. Slowly they rose, hands still anchoring one another, though now the grip anchored alliance rather than hostility. Dust settled around their ankles like soft cloth, concluding ceremony for all watchers. Formal words were unnecessary, yet tradition requested them, so Gilgamesh spoke first, voice resonant but unforced. He named the virtues he had witnessed: courage, stamina, the rare refusal to surrender flesh or spirit to quick victory. Enkidu responded with equal steadiness, praising fairness, mastery of restraint, and the strange gentleness that had surfaced beneath the king's iron discipline. Their phrases drifted upward to the listening gods, clinging like ivy around the ears of Shamash, the sun deity who loves honest combat. By those words, rivalry dissolved, replaced by a covenant of companionship older than scribes could record in wax and wind. The clasp of hands now glimmered with ritual weight. Sacrificial bowls were fetched, grain was poured, beer foamed, and a small white ram circled them thrice before being loosed unharmed back into the crowd, a sign the gods desired solidarity, not blood. Amid mild cheers, the onlookers' relaxed shoulders sore from tension. Children collected fragments of broken pavement as keepsakes, certain those shards had touched immortality. Women wove songs from the event, lullabies to soothe infants with tales of strength that chooses mercy. Within palace archives, scribes already sharpened reeds, readying clay to host this new turning point for all epochs. While celebrations sprouted among citizens, the two newfound brothers withdrew to a shaded courtyard perfumed by night-blooming jasmine. There, seated on a low limestone bench, they shared water chilled in earthen pitchers. Conversation drifted unhurried, tracing childhood memories. A king's games played beside the Euphrates, a wild man nursing injured cranes along riverbanks. They spoke of dreams, Gilgamesh's restless premonitions of distant cedar forests guarded by monstrous humbaba, Enkidu's quiet longing to taste the bread inhabitants baked within walled cities. In soft lamplight, the gulf between palace and plain diminished until it felt no larger than a palm's breadth that night. Old tablets tell that a bond attains divinity when sealed by shared counsel. Thus, advisors joined them, laying out polished carnelian dice, not for gambling, but as symbols of measured fate. The priestess Ninsun, Gilgamesh's mother, arrived robed in lapis twilight. She placed her hands upon both heads and whispered blessings shaped like river curves, promising that partnership would temper arrogance into wisdom. Enkidu, whose ears until now had known only wolf song and storm tirades, bowed respectfully. The blessing concluded with a pitcher of milk mixed with honey, offered, tasted, and left to the stars' slow regard till dawn. Night deepened, yet the city remained quietly awake, savoring peace as though it were a cool fig placed upon the tongue. On ramparts, guards retold the day's marvel to one another, voice kept hushed to honor slumbering households. In back alleys, storytellers fingered loose straw, rehearsing lines that would soon travel to distant caravanserai. For the first time since his coronation, Gilgamesh felt the crown's weight lessen. He lay upon a lion pelt near Enkidu, eyes tracing constellations that suggested roads into unknown forests. Within shared silence, decisions congealed like dew on bronze. The world beyond Uruk was calling them forth. Yet beneath serenity, subtle music of tragedy already tuned its strings. The gods seldom grant gifts without requesting tribute, and friendship forged luminous often casts equally luminous shadows. In oracular dreams that fluttered around Gilgamesh's pillow, he saw axes failing, saw skies darkening above cedar boughs, saw a companion's breath wavering like flame in sudden wind. He woke, pressed the vision back into stillness, and turned to find Enkidu sleeping soundly, the lines of his face softened by city comfort. The king settled again, convinced daylight talk would decipher nocturnal riddles when proper rites were performed by wise elders nearby. Morning rose with understated bronze, and swallows stitched fresh brightness between rooftops. Guilds reopened stalls, offering bread whose crust cracked like small applause. Gilgamesh and Enkidu emerged side by side, limbs carrying the shared ache of yesterday's trial. They visited the city's sacred kiln where new bricks were being fired, and each lifted one unfinished block, placing it carefully upon the growing wall as quiet testament. Strength henceforth would build, not break. Craftsman smiled, recognizing promise in that simple gesture, a re-anchoring of power toward creation. The brothers departed before accolades grew, letting action speak what words might tarnish today. As afternoon heat shimmered over the distant river, preparations began for a journey none dared name too loudly. Maps were unfolded showing cedar groves beyond 7 mountains, spears were inspected, prayers drafted on damp clay. Yet for the moment, Uruk rested in the rare hush of a chord, lulled by the steady cadence of 2 synchronized heartbeats. From dust and clangor had risen brotherhood. From brotherhood would rise voyages fit for tablets and stars alike. The hush lingers at chapter's close, like twilight balanced on a lintel, suggesting paths that open gently when friendship walks first into the waiting world beyond dawn. Still clung in pale ribbons to the ramparts of Uruk, exactly where our murmured tale last paused, and the dusty road beyond the Scorpion Gate glimmered like a thread drawn between the waking city and the cedar-scented unknown. Gilgamesh and Enkidu stood upon that thread, half in dream, half in resolve, their sandals dappled by the tilted light. Around them, the clang of bronze had already faded into memory, but its aftertaste lingered, like the hum of a struck bell, in the tempered blades now resting against their calves. The weapons had been fashioned through a night of patient smithwork. Copper, gold, and meteoric iron coaxed together in glowing hearths, hammered by artisans whose arms moved with the unhurried steadiness of tides. When the final rivets cooled, the 2 companions felt their weight, not as burden, but as a hush, an inner silence that grows when a purpose settles upon living bones. Gilgamesh cradled his axe of 7 talents, polished to a mirror that caught sunrise and poured it back as liquid fire. Enkidu steadied his great sword, leaf-shaped like the grasses of his former steppe, etched with tiny running animals, each one a quiet votive to the wild he once belonged to. Yet before the earth could receive the first crunching footfall of their journey, ritual obliged them to circle homeward, into the council court where the elders waited. These gray-bearded stewards had watched kings rise and seasons hinge, and so their speech flowed in reed-like susurrus, admonition laced with blessing, caution folded into wisdom. One elder lifted a cup of date wine so slowly that the liquid hardly stirred. He spoke of cedar trunks thicker than city towers, of humbaba's face striped with terror like storm clouds over threshing floors, and of the fragile line between reputation and ruin. Another pressed a sprig of tamarisk into Gilgamesh's palm, reminding him that the mightiest tree is fed by threads of water too fine for the eye. They anointed foreheads with fragrant oil, traced spirals on bracers, and whispered the ancient name of each star that would oversee their march. Night afterward brought the first dream. They slept on packed wool beneath the western wall, letting the desert breathe through its long sighs. A mountain collapsed in Gilgamesh's sleep, stones tumbling, dust veiling the moon. From under the rubble emerged a radiant creature whose wings shimmered like fish beneath a river's skin. In the dream, the creature touched his shoulder. The heat of that touch burned fear away. He woke, described the vision to Enkidu, and together they carried it to the temple cantor at dawn. She listened, sandals tucked beneath her, eyes half shut, and interpreted, "The crumbling mountain is Humbaba's boast, the winged being, the favor of Shamash, the fiery touch, permission to proceed." Hearing this, the king's pulse became steady as drum skins stretched across oaken rings. So step followed step, days lengthening behind them like banners bleached by travel. Past orchards buzzing with early figs, past fields where sickles rested in tidy rows, past boundary stones scabbed with lichen, they walked until the cultivated world ran thin and only raw hills crowded the horizon. The sun was their hourglass, its slow descent scrawled coppery lines on shield rims. At night another dream unfurled. Gilgamesh saw a bull striding in the heavens, froth wringing its nostrils, yet lowering its great head to offer him a vantage on its back. The cantor's interpretation, spoken through dusk's dappling doves, promised royal assistance, but warned that pride, if allowed free rein, would gore the fellowship itself. The cedar forest at last rose before them like green surf halted mid-crash. Air thickened with resin, light soaked into needles and emerged tinted gold. Enkidu, child of open plains, felt dwarfed. The first trunk they passed was banded with time so deep it seemed the memory of rainfall had become wood. They halted, hearts slowing, and placed bare palms against bark scored by centuries of wind. The forest answered with a pulse, older than mortality, that seldom finds a human wrist. Yet the hush could not stand unbroken. Lured by talk of timber unmatched on earth, carpenters followed in the hero's shadow, dragging ropes, wedges, and ox-pulled carts. The world, quick to imitate brave footsteps, often hurries to harvest the trophies promised by risk. For now, however, axes slept while fear of humbaba still ruled the glades. The guardian arrived as breath arrives to a body, without announcement, indispensable, complete. A gust bent treetops, then stilled, revealing a figure whose stature answered the forest's own. Humbaba's face was streaked with patterns only storms wear, alternating light and shadow, as though dawn and dusk were playing dice upon his cheeks. 7 auras, subtle halos of crackling heat, circled him, and each aura teased the travelers with a separate dread: vertigo, drought, eclipse, serpents, silence, forgetting, and the unknown. Birds hushed upon sensing those rings. Gilgamesh stepped forward, mouth cotton dry, yet voice even. Declarations were traded, terse as thrown spears. Then metal rasped, leaving scabbards to rest in dusk's shallow bowl. Enkidu advanced at the king's flank, muscles loose, gait measured, recalling every antelope's glide he had ever chased. Combat began not with a roar, but with the soft hush of feet repositioning among roots. Humbaba's hand, broad as a thresher's rake, swept down, shearing leaves into green rain. The axe rose to meet it. Sparks pinned themselves against the gloaming. Hours seemed to swim inside each heartbeat. The guardian's weight shook soil, the hero's resolve shook history. During one breathless moment, Humbaba stumbled, a knee carving a trough in moss, and Gilgamesh seized that gap, pressing the honed edge to the creature's pulsing throat. Life, enormous and ancient, waited beneath his fingers. Time widened. Even the caravan men, distant and quivering behind bowls, sensed the pause. Humbaba pleaded, not with shrill terror, but with an authority born of unbroken stewardship. Spare me, and the cedars will remain watchful allies. Fell me, and greed will find the forest naked. Gilgamesh's lungs filled with resin-scented air. Fame, bright and immediate, flashed before him. Songs etched on clay, plazas cheering the slayer of giants. Yet another vision, slower and leaf-shadowed, stirred, a future where trunks still rise, where wind still rifts among branches, a future that would never chant his name, but would endure. Enkidu, sensing hesitation, pressed nearer. Wildman though he was, cities had already begun to weave appetite through his blood. He urged the strike, speaking of renown, of proofs against mortality. Gilgamesh listened, the blade trembled. Mercy hovered like a moth near lamplight. Finally decision fell inward, heavy as iron. The axe descended. Humbaba's 7 auras extinguished one by one, like torches smothered by dew. When the final ring winked out, a hush rippled beyond sight, as though mountains afar had lowered their shoulders. The guardian collapsed. The forest inhaled the vacancy he left, exhaling a wisp that smelled faintly of first rains upon earth. Chains were fastened, trophies taken. The cedar harvest began before twilight fully drained. Bronze teeth bit wood, wedges sang, fragrant plumes rose. Trunks that had measured millennia shrieked as they pitched towards soil. Gilgamesh walked among the stumps, victory laurels warm upon his brow, yet a filament of unease threaded his spirit. Each fallen tree cast a shadow that felt oddly like Humbaba's outstretched arm, beseeching beyond death. Enkidu called for celebration, altars lit, meat roasted, prayers shouted. The king complied, but he kept glancing at the ragged skyline, at the gap now open for distant winds to trespass. That night the third dream arrived, drifting through shrinking foliage. Gilgamesh lay beside a fading campfire when he felt again the winged being, yet its feathers were now dull, flecked with ash. It wept sap instead of tears. From its chest protruded an axe handle, sap dripping where green blood should. It urged him onward, yet each urging seemed to echo with small cracking sounds, like twigs stepped on by unseen feet. He woke before dawn, heart lumbering, and watched embers shell into gray. Morning revealed the first wagons already groaning with fragrant timbers, wheels grooved deep into newly bared earth. Birds circled, confused, their former perches gone. Sunlight, no longer filtered, hammered the soil, and resinous smoke blurred the margin between air and thought. Gilgamesh joined laborers in stacking logs, muscles moving by old habit, but his mind roamed unsettled territory. He remembered the elder who spoke of water threads feeding great trunks. He wondered how many threads had been cut alongside Humbaba's life. In the hush that followed, an unborn realization stirred. Victories may expose the questions they were meant to silence. Under that murmured intuition, the campfire dwindled, giving back its last sparks to the patient dark, and the two companions folded themselves into sleep, each cradling both triumph and tremor. Beyond the ring of carts, the river kept its rhythm, sliding toward the distant walls of Uruk, where new trials, more human, yet no less daunting, slowly took shape beneath the listening stars. The cedar scent still lingered in the corridors of memory, even as the city of Uruk settled back into the hush that follows triumph. Embers from the forest fires glowed only in the tales that people whispered to one another, while the king, Gilgamesh, and his companion Enkidu washed the blood of monsters from their hands. Nightly breezes brushed the palace parapets, carrying away the sharp resins of cedar and replacing them with the faint perfume of river reeds. In that exhale of calm, the gods regarded the mortals, weighing pride against gratitude. For a moment the world breathed evenly, and the heroes dreamed of rest. Yet where victory shines, vanity soon casts its shadow. News of Gilgamesh's prowess, of shoulders broad enough to swing axes against holy cedars, drifted upward to the throne of Ishtar, daughter of Anu, mistress of love, plenty, and war. Her eyes, bright as morning stars, widened, and desire rippled through her immortal veins. The goddess descended, veiled in shimmering gauze, every anklet chiming like soft rain. She found the hero cleansing his weapons, bronze glinting with twilight, and she spoke. Her voice was honey, her promise rich. Thrones, chariots, and kingdoms would bloom beneath his feet if only he would become her bridegroom. She offered jewels from the darkness of space, vines heavy with grapes that never wither, and harps strung with silver moonlight. Gilgamesh, who had faced the roar of Humbaba and felt the pulse of godhood in his own sinews, lifted his gaze toward the goddess. Calmly, almost lazily, he unspooled a string of words sharper than any sword. Why, divine Ishtar, should he pluck her fruit when every branch she touched became brittle? He reminded her of Tammuz, whose tears still wet the underworld, of the winged shepherd turned talon-torn bird, of the stallion lamed by her caress, and of the lion reduced to spent hide. Each lover, he said, had tasted bliss only to be ground into dust. Better, he concluded, to stand alone in the wind than kneel in the trap of her embrace. Silence followed, heavy and unbroken, until the goddess's cheeks flushed the color of storm clouds. Scorn is a thorn even to immortals. Ishtar flew aloft, skirts snapping like banners, and stormed the sapphire halls of her father Anu. Tears, glittering, half fury, half humiliation, streaked her face. She demanded the bull of heaven, that cosmic beast bred from starlight and primal dust, whose hooves could shatter mountains. Anu, slow to anger, weighed the request. If he unleashed the bull, would not Uruk's cattle graze on emptiness and its citizens starve? Ishtar promised if he refused, she would scream so loud the dead would rise and feast upon the living. The heavens shivered. Anu, unable to withstand her threat, placed the golden nose ring into the bull's snorting nostrils and loosed the creature toward the earth. First, the land grew still. Then a hollow bellow rolled across the plain, deeper than thunder, older than language. The bull of heaven, mane swirling with nebulae, set its sharp horn against the clouds and descended. With its first stomp, the earth cracked, swallowing 300 men. With the second, fields shriveled, their barley turning to ash. With the third, rivers recoiled, leaving fish flapping upon bare stones. Panic rippled through Uruk. Mothers clutched children, granaries rattled empty, and priests tasted dust on the altar breads. Ishtar herself rode upon the creature's back, her laughter like shards of ice, urging it onward toward the palace walls. Within those walls, Gilgamesh saw the sky darken and understood that rejection had become war. He summoned Enkidu, whose wild mane was still powdered with cedar sawdust, and together they stepped forth. No trumpet blared, no crowd cried out, only steady breathing marked their resolve. The bull lowered its cosmic head, ripples of starlight quivering along its spine. Dust and comets churned behind its hooves. Enkidu, quick as a desert wind, slid to the side, grasped the creature's tail, and dug his heels into the ground. Gilgamesh, muscles taut as bowstrings, closed the distance, raising the axe that had felled cedars. In 3 breaths, blade met flesh forged from constellation, and stars bled into the dust. The bull reeled, its roar rattling every bone in Uruk, Yet the grip of the warriors did not falter. A final, glimmering stroke severed the mighty neck, and the sky itself seemed to sigh. Dust settled, and the carcass, vast as a fallen hill, lay still. From the creature's chest, Gilgamesh hewed the colossal heart, lifting it toward Shamash, god of the sun, in silent offering. Dawn arrived, gentle, painted with rose and apricot, and Uruk woke to the impossible. The famine had broken, the fissures had closed, and barley once again nodded in the breeze. Crowds hovered along the avenues, their sighs turning to songs, their fears turning to laughter. Garlands of fig leaves draped across doorways, drums pulsed slower than hearts, and children, bright-eyed, traced the path of the fallen star beast with sticks. In the courtyards, the palace bakers kneaded dough laced with pomegranate syrup, letting sweet steam billow like morning mist above the flagstones. Harpists tuned golden chords, drawing notes that drifted upward to perch upon balcony rails. Veterans of old campaigns, their scars silvering beneath oil, recounted Jericho-high walls they once feared, yet now compared to the slain bull's flank. Chandlers pressed fragrant tallow into lamps, so the avenues flickered with rows of patient stars mirroring the sky. Even the riverboats joined the jubilee, their prows draped with garlands of lotus. Everywhere the name of Gilgamesh mingled with enkidus in a single chant, woven through with gratitude as soft as shawls. It seemed, for that lingering afternoon, that death itself had agreed to stay outside the gates of mighty red brick. From the ramparts, Ishtar watched, rage curdling in her throat. The very people who should have trembled now scattered petals at Gilgamesh's feet. Unable to twist fate, she tore at her raiment and hurled a bitter curse. Enkidu, flushed with triumph, plucked the severed thigh of the bull, vast as a ship's mast, and flung it toward her in mocking salute. The thigh struck the gates of heaven, resounding like a distant gong. All laughter paused, for none could guess what such irreverence might awaken. High above, the gods gathered in quiet debate. Anu stroked the rings of Saturn like a lute, weighing justice. Enlil, lord of wind, let his breath spiral down into the valleys, testing the names of the two heroes. Shamash, bright but impartial, cast rays of counsel. Proud deeds, they agreed, deserve thanks, yet pride itself must be answered. The slaying of the bull, a beast forged of celestial authority, had tipped heavenly balance. Someone would pay. In that hushed chamber, fate curled around Enkidu's name like a smoke ring, invisible yet tightening. Far below, the skin of the earth, lately scarred by hooves, tried to heal, yet could not quite forget the pressure of the heavenly beast. Thin fissures lingered like veins in old marble, whispering when night wind crossed them. Farmers walking the perimeter sometimes heard a muffled heartbeat beneath the soil, as though the bull's spirit paced in tunnels of shadow. Dogs raised muzzles and whined at nothing. Birds veered around an unseen pillar in the air. The city scribes, wary historians of omen, dipped reeds in ink and recorded these small tremors on wet clay, lines curling like restless sleepers. They titled the tablets simply, Aftershock. Few citizens read the signs, but each candle seemed to shiver more quickly toward its stub before dawn cooled the wax. Silence listened there. Unaware of councils above, Gilgamesh and Enkidu reclined beside the Euphrates, where reeds swayed and frogs hummed their moonlit lullabies. They washed their blistered hands, letting starlight mingle with ripples. Wine cooled in clay pitchers, bread steamed upon broad leaves, and laughter drifted as lazily as wood smoke. Yet even in contentment, Enkidu felt a prickle, as though unseen eyes grazed his skin. He spoke of dreams, of dark doors, and feathers weighing heavier than stone. Gilgamesh, fatigued, brushed the omens aside, promising festivals, races, and gleaming new walls to honor their valor. Night deepened, drawing silver paths across the river. Crickets stitched their quiet patterns, and palm fronds rustled like slow applause. In distant streets, the last of the revelers doused their torches, leaving only the bull's vast hide stretched upon the square to gleam beneath the moon. Somewhere unseen, Ishtar's sobs softened into plotting, like embers smoldering beneath ash. The world, though still, was not yet at peace. Beyond the gardens, lions paced the city's edge, uneasy, sensing the tremor of future sorrow. Stars blinked, as if trying to warn the friends dozing by the riverbank. The water, unhurried, carried away the scent of celestial blood, and with it, a sliver of innocence. Yet the heroes slept, dreaming of cedar groves they might plant. unaware that dawn would bring tidings neither axe nor friendship could hew. Murmurs of celebration still drifted across the ramparts of Uruk when the torches guttered low and the fragrance of cedar lingered in the dark. In that hush after conquest, Gilgamesh and Enkidu stretched bruised limbs beneath the same moon that had watched them fell Humbaba and slay the bull of heaven. Yet even as the city exhaled triumph, a sliver of disquiet slipped in on the wind and settled beside Enkidu like unwelcome dew. The tale now turns from clashing axes and roaring bulls toward a softer, colder enemy, one that creeps through the lungs and cannot be wrestled to the ground. At first it seemed simple fatigue, a fever no warmer than campfire embers, and a cough that rattled only at night. By the second dawn, Enkidu shivered beneath piled tapestries, and heat pulsed from his skin like sunlight caught in bronze. Palace healers muttered of divine displeasure. Watchers soaked cloth in cool water, yet steam rose whenever the cloth touched his brow. The mighty arms that had throttled lions now twitched nervously, seeking a strength that had already slipped beyond reach. Gilgamesh, helpless for the first time in memory, felt dread thicken the air heavier than any armor. Delirium soon wrapped the hero in its gauze. He cursed the hunter who first spied him by the watering hole, cursed the trapper's snare, cursed the cedar gate he and Gilgamesh had carved in boastful joy. His voice, once a tempest, cracked like a reed flute out of tune. Servants recoiled when he cried, "May the plains deny their grain, may the paths forget the sandal's print." The malediction stained the chamber's rafters, echoing long after the fever lulled him into uneasy sleep. Gilgamesh knelt beside the rush mat, counting the frantic jumps of Enkidu's pulse. He promised altars of lapis, jars of honeyed beer, whole herds of lambs if Shamash would lift the plague. Yet the sun god rode silently across the sky, and every ray seemed to sear rather than soothe. The king who had mocked death on the battlefield now discovered how flimsy even royal prayers could be when the listener turned his face away. On the 10th night, silence thickened until even the oil lamps hesitated to crackle. Then Enkidu's eyes flew open, pupils vast, reflecting places no living man can see. "Friend," he rasped, "a dream drags me downward." He spoke of a creature with lion's hands and eagle's wings who led him through 7 sealed gates. Dust caked his tongue, crowns lay in piles, and kings and slaves alike gnawed stale bread of shadows. Ereshkigal, queen of that realm, stared without blinking, her silence heavier than iron. The vision chilled every listener, but none so fiercely as Gilgamesh. Here was a door strength could not kick open, a fortress no cedar beam could smash. Triumph, he understood, might win songs. It could not ransom a soul from the house of dust. In that moment, fear crept beneath his lion-embroidered cloak and nested near the heart, beating there with wings of lead. At dawn of the 12th day, Enkidu's breath slipped apart like frayed rope, and the final strand snapped unnoticed between ticks of a water clock. Lantern flames guttered, acknowledging the change. Gilgamesh covered his friend's face with a linen veil, then tore his own garments and wandered the courtyard, roaring grief so raw that sparrows startled from fig trees. Uruk prepared a burial fit for royalty. Craftsmen inlaid a wooden couch with lapis petals, bronze lions, and river shells, so Enkidu might rest upon earth, metal, and water all at once. Tiny jars of oil, bead necklaces, and miniature tools were arrayed like silent companions. Priests led the procession to the Euphrates, their cadence set by a hollow drum whose beat carried across the current. Women loosened braids, poured sweet beer into the river, and sang of reeds bending, of boats crossing, of hearts learning absence. For 7 days the city lamented. At sunset, Gilgamesh stood upon the wall, listing each adventure that had welded their spirits. The first wrestling match, the cedar forest, the bull's collapsed form upon holy ground. Citizens answered with flutes and low horns, letting the melody curl upward like incense ashes. When the 7th torch burned out, sound ceased, but the king's grief remained, a stone dropped into deep water, sinking beyond measure. In the quiet that followed, Gilgamesh drifted through stone corridors as though they belonged to someone else. He touched walls he had commissioned, proud monuments to his strength, and wondered how long until lichens claimed the mortar. Enkidu's vision replayed, weary shades wearing feathers that never lift them. If such was destiny, what good were inscriptions or triumphal gates? Mortality, once a word for lesser men, now pressed against his chest like a spearhead refusing withdrawal. Sages tried to console him with custom. They described the land without return, where the dead, though thirsty, could sip the libations poured by descendants, where remembered names glowed softly and forgotten names dimmed like spent embers. They recited hymns of Inanna's descent, chanted charms to Nergal, and spoke of rare mortals granted seats among the constellations. Yet each reassurance only traced the bars of the same cage. Existence continued, but never again in sunlight. So grief sharpened into resolve. Whenever wind stirred the reeds, Gilgamesh fancied a footstep pacing beside him. Whenever sunrise limned the palace stones, he half turned, expecting a laugh no longer possible. The ache suggested a question no council had answered. Might somewhere a secret river wash clean the dust from mortal bones? A door not of death, but of continuance. The notion struck him like bronze upon anvil, painful, ringing, impossible to ignore. Before dawn on the 30th morning, the king laid aside scepter and diadem, donned a traveler's cloak, and thou stepped beyond Uruk's gate while bats still traced silent loops overhead. Behind him the drum of sorrow hung in the temple, its skin catching a final breath of night. Ahead stretched deserts patrolled by scorpion men and seas said to encircle the world. The search born of love and terror had begun, and the road would soon unfold its austere teachings. In the paling sky a single star lingered, bright as a promise, yet distant as a memory. Beneath that glimmer, Gilgamesh moved eastward, his footsteps muffled by dust older than dynasties. The walls of Uruk faded behind a curtain of dawn haze, and the silence left in their wake pressed forward with him. Where that silence leads, the chronicle will follow, tracing the king's quest toward the margins where myth meets the longing heart for a little while longer. That same evening, as twilight turned the river copper and violet, elders assembled on the western quay to perform the lament of flowing waters. One by one they knelt, scooped handfuls of Euphrates mud, and smeared it across bare shoulders, reminding themselves of the clay from which humanity rises and to which it returns. A reed harp sounded a plaintive mode, its strings tuned to the pulse of slow currents, vibrated in soft sympathy with the world's oldest grief. Fishermen anchored their skiffs midstream, holding torches aloft so scattered flames drifted like lantern constellations upon the moving surface. Every flicker promised guidance for Enkidu's spirit, lighting the invisible crossing to the netherworld's gate. When the final torch guttered, ash fell on the water like gray petals, and the river carried them silently away. Within the palace storerooms, scribes prepared clay tablets listing each object consigned to the tomb. 2 daggers of electrum, 3 measuring rods of cedar, a whetstone wrapped in leather, and a cup incised with the sign of the water god Ea. Such inventories were more than bureaucratic habit. In the logic of the age, spoken names preserved presence. To enumerate the gifts was to secure their reality inside the unseen realm. Alongside the lists, a priest copied a liturgy in neat columns of cuneiform, invocations to Namtar, herald of sickness, imploring him to release his grip, hymns to Ningish Zida, serpent of rebirth, begging him to guide the traveler through thorny passages. The stylus clicked against wet clay like distant rain, setting down hopes that might never be read by mortal eyes, yet might reach ears attuned to ritual murmurs beneath the earth. Beyond Uruk, caravans on dusty tracks carried rumors of the wild man's passing to distant cities. To Kish with its whitewashed ziggurat, to Lagash of many canals, even to the mountain villages where ore is pried from stubborn rock. Strangers who had never heard Enkidu's laughter paused at night to pour a measure of water onto the soil, honoring a hero they knew only through echoing tale. Thus the circle of grief widened, spreading like twilight across the plains, until even the gods perhaps felt a tremor of mortal sorrow rise toward their high courts. And within that shared hush, one question blossomed in many hearts. If death comes for the strongest among us, what gift might grant a name the power to outlast the wind? In the hush that lingered beneath the moon-washed battlements of Uruk, silence draped itself like a mourning veil upon the bricks, and the fading echo of Enkidu's departing breath still trembled in the joints of the city wall. Gilgamesh, whose restless heart had once been tethered to stone ramparts and festival drums, now felt only the steady pull of emptiness, as though the earth itself were urging him outward. In that aching pause we left him, staring toward the horizon where sky touched dust, half king, half shadow, wondering whether a path existed beyond the reach of grief. It is upon that pale horizon that the quiet story now resumes. Before dawn stretched its rose-colored fingers across the plain, the king exchanged royal brocade for the coarse hide of a wild goat. The once gilded body, proud and scented with cedar oil, slipped instead into roughness and dust, until nothing glittered except the unblinking determination in his eyes. He left through the postern gate in secret. No herald, no fanfare, only the low rustle of reeds by the riverbank bearing witness to his flight. A staff of ash wood balanced in his hand. A woven waterskin bumped against his hip. All else remained behind. Throne, council, and the name that had weighed him down. The steppe received him with an inhale of cold, sage-scented wind. Grass heads flickered silver beneath a paling sky, and every hoofprint of passing gazelle shone dew-beaded like tiny mirrors. Gilgamesh walked without map, guided only by the raw magnetism of his fear. A fear not of beasts, but of meaninglessness, of being a flame that burned bright, yet failed to outlast the night. In the hush he listened to the steady rhythm of his soul's pressing earth, and that heartbeat of footsteps became a chant. Find the one who conquered death. Night drifted over the plain like ink dropped into still water. Stars multiplied until the heavens looked strewn with salt. A chorus of distant roars simmered at the horizon, and soon a pride of lions emerged, tawny bodies sleek under moonlight, tails curling question marks in the dark. Hunger lit their amber eyes. The scent of man, though mingled with goat skin and dust, drew them nearer. Gilgamesh felt the ancient kinship between hunters, yet he did not flinch. He lifted his ash staff, whispered a prayer to Shamash, and met their shimmer with his own unblinking gaze. The confrontation was brief, quiet, full of unspoken accords. When the first lion leaped, he caught it mid-arc, muscles remembering the contests of Uruk's arena, the weight of stone doors he once lifted for sport. He wrestled the beast, pressed it to the earth, and its companions paused, reading the ancient language of dominance written in dust. Gilgamesh did not kill. He simply held until the creature's furious breaths slowed into wary acceptance. Freed, the lion shook its mane, offered a rumbling grunt that could have been respect, and turned away. The others followed, melting back into grass and shadow. Dawn returned, soft as a reed flute, turning each blade of grass to pale gold. Gilgamesh pressed onward until the plain crumpled into ridges, and the ridges rose into the twin peaks of Mashu, said to guard the rising and setting of the sun. The mountains loomed blue-black, their sides broken by fissures the length of rivers, their crowns hidden by drifting vapors. At their threshold stood the scorpion men, watchers whose shoulders brushed the very clouds. Their torsos were like armored kings, yet their lower bodies curved into chitinous tails tipped with silent poison. From beneath horned helms their eyes glittered red as garnet. When they spoke, words crawled across the air, deliberate and echoing, but not unkind. They marveled that mortal sinew had carried itself so far. Gilgamesh bowed, naming his grief, naming his purpose, to find the immortal Utnapishtim. The guardians listened, stingers poised but still, and at last opened a narrow door between their colossal feet, the mouth of a tunnel where day could not follow. Inside that passage, 12 leagues of darkness waited, each step a measure of heartbeat, each heartbeat a confrontation with terror. No torch could survive the windless interior. Even the memories of light seemed to dim. Gilgamesh walked by touch, one palm brushing damp stone, the other guarding his chest as though to cradle the invisible spark of life. He counted nothing, for numbers lose meaning when time itself dissolves. Instead he pictured dawn, the gentle smear of pink on a baby's cheek, the way Enkidu once laughed at birds skimming water, the shape of a seed before it breaks. When at last the tunnel surrendered him, morning sunlight struck his eyes like a remembered melody. The air smelled of juniper and distant salt, for the sea lay somewhere beyond the next ridge. Gilgamesh rested against a boulder, letting the warmth soak his shivering bones. From this perch he saw a slender hut crouched beside a date palm grove, smoke curling from its crooked chimney. That humble shelter belonged to Siduri, keeper of a tavern at the edge of the world. She was stirring barley beer in a copper cauldron when the stranger approached, goatskin cloak clinging in tatters, eyes fevered with questions. Siduri's heart fluttered. yet her gaze remained steady, reflecting both curiosity and caution. Between them stretched a small wooden counter, smelling of yeast and honey, upon which she quietly placed bread still warm from the oven. Without ceremony, she invited him to eat. Hunger humbled royalty. Gilgamesh broke the loaf, its crust crackling like fresh frost, and felt tears sting his cheeks. Over the soft clink of clay cups, she listened to his tale, of Enkidu's friendship and death, of futile hunts for meaning among lion prides, of the tunnel that scraped light from his bones. When silence settled, Siduri spoke not as oracle but as gardener, sowing small, sturdy truths. Life, she reminded, is a fragile jug passed hand to hand, best to taste the wine while it is sweet. Love the child who holds your fingers, cherish the warm bread that greets the morning, polish the doorway stones so neighbors feel welcome. Nothing endures, and therein lies the tenderness of living. Her words were water to parched ground. Gilgamesh felt humility seep through cracked pride, felt the possibility that a mortal span could still be vivid enough. Yet longing did not loosen its grip. The vision of Enkidu's silent eyes remained. Siduri sighed, recognizing that some journeys must finish themselves. She pointed to a shoreline where cypress stakes marked the mooring of Urshanabi, ferryman of the mysterious waters. Seek him, she said, though the voyage is treacherous. And with that, she tied a bundle of provisions, bread, dried figs, a flask of beer, then returned to her simmering cauldron. Clouds drifted like pale sheep across the afternoon as Gilgamesh followed a winding track of white pebbles down to the shore. The river there was broad, green as oxidized bronze, its surface scrolling slow patterns. A crude pier of tamarisk logs jutted outward, and beside it a boat rested, hull scarred by countless crossings. Urshanabi was not in sight, but near the boat lay strange stone creatures, shaped like men yet faceless, their limbs etched with mute runes. He sensed at once that these objects were alive in some hidden way, vessels of spell and measurement. Perhaps they recorded secret currents or kept the waters of death at bay. Yet grief, fatigue, and a simmering frustration with fate boiled together, and the king's hand tightened around his staff. With a cry that startled nesting egrets, he swung. Stone cracked, fell apart like baked clay. Piece after piece shattered until the shore glittered with shards. The violence lasted only moments, but when the dust cleared, the magic things were ruined beyond repair. Urshanabi emerged from a cluster of reeds, oars over one shoulder, his skin weathered as driftwood. He took in the scene, the ruined stone things, the stranger with wild eyes, and sighed, not in anger but in the resigned manner of one accustomed to the whims of those who hurt. The ferryman understood at once that the journey ahead had just grown more difficult, yet he also recognized the longing that drives a storm across calm water. Without reproach, he gestured to the boat. There would be time enough to rebuild what was broken. Gilgamesh stepped aboard, pulse steadying as the hull rocked beneath him. Behind lay a trail of lion paw prints, crushed rock, and the echo of good counsel. Before him spread a river whose surface reflected clouds like tomb lids of alabaster. The ferryman untied the rope, and the boat drifted outward, leaving Siduri's smoke as a thin gray thread on the horizon. Somewhere beyond this current waited a silence older than cities, and an old man who survived the great flood. Toward that fragile promise, the vessel now glided. Water lapped like slow breathing against cedar planks, and the sun slipped westward, carrying the day into quiet amber. Night would follow in velvet. The hush of the cosmic sea still shimmered behind Gilgamesh, small waves brushing the last reeds where Urshanabi had moored the boat of stony tackle. In that lingering hush lay the memory of bitter oars, silence of companions lost, and the echo of Enkidu's absent laughter. With sand still damp beneath calloused feet, the king of Uruk stepped onto the god-forsaken shore that no mortal was meant to visit, where immortality hung like mist above the horizon. The sky here felt older, as though dawn rose through centuries before consenting to glow. Before him a gray garden stretched, neither dead nor blooming, yet tingling with the dream of both. At its center a modest house leaned into a ridge of reddish rock. Coiling vines of date and tamarisk masked the doorway, their leaves trembling though no wind walked. Utnapishtim, sage of the flood, dwelled within, bearing the impossible gift of endless days. Yet the land around appeared tired of eternity. Pebbles smoothed to uniformity, streams moving so slowly that reflections forgot to ripple, birds repeating the same quiet note, as if rehearsal never reached performance. Gilgamesh advanced, each step clanging against his thoughts. The weight of a city awaiting answers, the weight of a friend he could not resurrect, the heavier weight of a beating heart destined to falter. Utnapishtim emerged, not radiant, not austere, simply weathered like driftwood carried since beginnings. His eyes recorded tides of ages, yet his shoulders sagged with unremarkable fatigue. Immortality, it seemed, had kissed him but offered no rest. Without ceremony, he gestured toward a stone bench where the sea's murmur could still be heard. Words passed like low tide, measured, unhurried, almost reluctant to disturb the dust. At the king's hush-voiced plea, the Old One began recounting the time when gods grew tired of human chatter and plotted to scrub the earth clean. It had not been justice, only caprice, he explained, an impulse as sudden as a summer sneeze among divinity. Ea, secretly fond of mortal noise, whispered the warning into reeds. Reeds murmured it into Utnapishtim's dreaming ear. A boat, proportions threaded from divine geometry, was built in frantic quiet. Family, artisans, creatures with paws or hooves, seeds yet to sprout, all were packed into resonant dark. Then heaven's sluice gates unlatched. Waters clawed mountains, drowned cities like startled ants, erased names etched on clay. For 6 days and nights the world was indistinguishable from sea. On the 7th, as though suddenly bored, the torrent folded into stillness. The craft grounded upon Nemush's breast. A dove, then a swallow, then a raven explored the sky until dry land beckoned. The survivors stepped onto mud that had once been avenues, blinking at a silence deeper than the one preceding creation. The gods, in a late pang of remorse, gathered like children caught in mischief. They granted Utnapishtim and spouse unending life, reward or exile. Having listened, Gilgamesh felt both awe and disappointment, for the tale ended without the formula he had hoped to seize. Utnapishtim, perceiving the hunger behind the king's storm-tossed eyes, proposed a small demonstration. If mortality wished to test its edge, let the king remain awake for a single week. Staying conscious, said the sage, mirrored the vigilance demanded by eternity. Gilgamesh accepted instantly. Valor leapt quicker than reflection. A bare patch of sandy earth became the appointed arena. No guards, no drums, only the sea's soft shushing and the fragrance of cedar carried faintly from memory. He sat cross-legged, thoughts marched at first, recounting walls measured, battles won, the curling smile of Ishtar when she craved him. Dusk diluted outlines, stars brightened one by one like slow applause. Muscles slackened despite resolve. He pinched flesh, murmured formulas, but eyelids lowered as though commanded by tides deeper than will. In the first hour, slender sleep sneaked across his shoulders. By the second, it draped his spine. By the third, it closed around him like a mother's shawl. When dawn's pale silver returned, the hero sprawled gently breathing, hair tangled with sand, unaware of his own surrender. Utnapishtim's quiet-footed wife baked a loaf each daylight interval, setting it beside the sleeper. By the 7th morning, 7 crusts lay ranked, some fresh, some hard as pottery, one blurred with mildew, a calendar of human limitation. Gilgamesh stirred at last, startled by the length of his own shadow. He denied slumber, claiming but an instant had passed, until the elder pointed toward the silent witnesses of bread. Embarrassment flushed the warrior's cheeks far deeper than any battle wound. Immortality had slipped again, as effortlessly as dream sand falling between clenched fingers. Yet compassion survived within the aged couple. E's favor still shimmered around them like thin incense. Utnapishtim revealed another path, narrower, less impossible. Beneath the cosmic waters, near the mouth of the 2 rivers, grew a thorned plant, crimson as first dawn, whose petals could restore lost vigor. It would not halt death forever, but could roll back time, gifting renewal. Gilgamesh, heart re-quickened, accepted directions. Urshanabi, forgiven, prepared the boat once more. Together they returned across the watery afterworld, poles tapping wary rhythms, until familiar lands breathed their heat against the prow. Descending through glassy water, Gilgamesh tied stones to his ankles and sank among wavering reeds, lungs burning but spirit blazing brighter. Fingers bled against thorns, yet at last they closed around the prize. The hero severed the stem, bubbles spiraled upward like silver prayers. Back on deck he laughed, a sound half joy, half relief. Deciding to share the boon with gray elders of Uruk before tasting it himself, He wrapped the plant in reeds damp with brine. Evening swelled. The boat glided languidly along a canal where clear pools invited brief bathing and the taste of sweet water. While the king immersed aching limbs in the cooling pool, a serpent, centuries old and silently wise, slid from reeds. Drawn by the plant's pungent promise, it coiled around the bundle, fangs sampling the bittersweet sap. One swift swallow, one discarded husk, and rainbow skins began to ripple down the creature's length. Rejuvenated, it shed the past and slithered back into unreadable dusk. Gilgamesh surfaced to an empty shore. Reeds whispered innocence. A solitary shell clicked in the mud as if remarking on chance. The boatman watched sorrow press lines deeper across the hero's brow. No spear could recover what cunning jaws had taken. Rage rose, but its fire lacked fuel. Exhaustion quenched it into a soft sigh. Gilgamesh knelt, fingers resting on earth still marked by the serpent's winding blessing. Tears found no resistance. He named the moment, not defeat, but instruction. Strength alone could not hoard life, vigilance alone could not prize it. Destiny, he grasped, was woven with loose ends, and beauty lived in the fragile weave. Standing, he envisioned Uruk's massive gates, the hum of craftsmen, the laughter of children beneath unfinished towers. Return now promised a softer crown. The river carried boat and thoughts downstream. Night rose, laying velvet over cedar groves. Stars looked less like holes in a vault and more like seeds waiting to be sown. Gilgamesh spoke little. Urshanabi steered, mindful of sandbars. In the hush, oar strokes resembled breathing, authoritative yet accepting. The hero wrapped his cloak about shoulders, emptied of conquest, and felt the steady drum of a mortal pulse. That rhythm, once scorned, now sounded music enough. The plant was gone, but the longing it had awakened remained, tempered into gentleness. By dawn, ramparts of sun-baked brick emerged over the plain, amber in first light. From afar, the walls seemed taller than memory, poems cast into architecture. Gilgamesh felt pride well without arrogance. Within those courses of red clay, men and women would labor, feast, mourn, and one day die, yet their city would speak for them to posterity, stone syllables outlasting breaths. The king resolved to inscribe his journey upon tablets, to place them within the temple library where winds could not erode ink. The tale, he sensed, would outlive the teller, and that might suffice. And so the boat nudged the quay, rope tightening with a sound like a final note. Footsteps of a once restless monarch found the familiar dust of Uruk, yet his pace no longer chased horizons. Above, the early sky opened in quiet blue, generous and mortal. In the next calm hour, as gates swung wide and citizens gathered, Gilgamesh would lift his eyes to the walls his own hands had measured and see them anew, not as barriers against death, but as testaments of living craft. From that recognition, a last lesson would unfurl, gentle as twilight. Somewhere inside the palace, scribes ground pigment, unaware that new verses would soon demand their reed pens. Somewhere under market awnings, storytellers rehearsed familiar myths, unaware that a fresh branch was drifting their way. Even the bricks of the city, warm from afternoon sun, seemed to lean forward to listen. Time moved no faster, yet anticipation rippled through streets like a slow breeze easing curtains before evening. Shadows lengthened with patient delight. Moon-soft hush settles over the city once more. We pick up just where we drifted last night. Gilgamesh standing upon the height of Uruk's ramparts, fingertips resting on sun-warmed brick that now feels cool beneath the rising stars. Down in the streets, lamps are guttering, conversations fade to murmurs, and the wind carries only the gentle rustle of date palms. You may picture him there, haft of holy mortal, listening, reflecting, breathing. It is this unhurried stillness, this settling of dust and thought alike, that beckons us toward the final turning of our tale. The bricks themselves begin to speak, not in sudden clamor, but in patient, porous memory. Each kiln-fired block remembers the hands that shaped it. They recall the river clay pressed into wooden molds, the singed scent of straw, the craftsman's quiet jokes shared beneath the Mesopotamian sun. Gilgamesh, having wandered to the edge of the earth and back again, at last settles into pride, not in tyrannical conquest, nor in unattainable immortality, but in mortal craftsmanship. These walls bear every thumbprint. They are, in their way, as alive as any breath. In that dawning realization, he names the city itself, the true epic. Turn your eyes to the wall, he urges future generations, inviting pilgrims, dreamers, and even us, centuries later, to trace the seams between bricks and discover stories tucked like seeds within the mortar. His restored pride is no longer vanity, it is guardianship. The walls become a choir of human skill, each voice reminding us that meaning can be sung into stone, and that such songs, though finite, may echo across immeasurable spans of time. Across the centuries, clay tablets carry the echo onward. First come the old Babylonian fragments, small, palm-sized witnesses inscribed with delicate wedge marks, their edges broken, their cuneiform columns occasionally stopping mid-sentence where history snapped them in two. Scribes tuck them into reed baskets, store them beneath temple floors, forget them, rediscover them, copy them again. The story migrates from city to city as rivers change course and dynasties rise or fall. Every copy is an act of faith, a quiet assertion that the tale must not be lost. By the time we reach the Royal Library of Ashurbanipal, the narrative has grown thick with commentary, glosses, and alternate spellings, layers upon layers of interpretive dust. There, among tens of thousands of tablets, the epic hides in plain sight. A king who prided himself on knowing the written word preserves myths as one might preserve grain against famine. He commands scribes to secure tablets from scribal schools, shrines, and marketplaces far beyond Nineveh. Each borrowed text is recopied carefully. Each scribe signs his name as if placing a small stone on a larger cairn. In this way, the library becomes its own kind of wall, a fortress built of language instead of brick, holding back the hungry, eroding silence. Yet even this fortress crumbles. Fires sweep the palace. Ashurbanipal's heirs quarrel. The city falls, and all that remains beneath the ruin is compacted clay, its wedge marks hardened to terracotta by accidental kiln heat. The tablets wait, patient and uncomplaining, under rubble and shifting sands. Waiting, too, are the echoes, lines that will travel into far-off scriptures and later literatures like invisible tributaries. We trace those tributaries now, unhurriedly, as one traces constellations before sleep. The flood tablet, with its reed arc and its birds released toward the horizon, will seep into the Hebrew book of Genesis. The lament of Siduri the tavern keeper, life which you look for you will never find, will flicker through Koheleth's sober verses. All is vanity, and yet eat, drink, find contentment in your labor. The wrestling of Gilgamesh and Enkidu foreshadows Homer's heroes grappling on dusty plains, and the aching friendship between Hector and Achilles. Later still, Dante will recall the journey through strange realms. Mary Shelley will borrow the Titan's name for her own creation. Modern poets will return to Uruk's gate whenever they yearn to measure the pulse of human striving. While these threads stretch outward, another thread curves backward, always to the wall, always to the city. In each retelling, the invitation to witness the bricks remains. As monks illuminated vellum in cool cloisters, as medieval travelers heard distant whispers of a flood hero named Gilgamesh, as 19th century explorers followed the Tigris in search of Nineveh's ruins, that call persisted. Look upon my works, not in despair, but in gentle recognition. And so, at last, the tablets meet modern eyes. The year is 1853. A young Assyrian Christian worker named Hormuzd Rassam, assisting Austin Henry Layard, unearths mound after mound in the desert crescent. From one shattered chamber he lifts broken tablets whose surfaces seem, at first, meaningless, just a forest of nail-shaped dents. Time is slow here. Dust hangs in the air like a veil. Weeks pass before scholars in London wash the fragments, align the columns, and realize they are holding pieces of the oldest known epic poem. More decades pass. George Smith, a humble engraver turned self-taught Assyriologist, leans over a compilation of fragments in the British Museum. As he deciphers the flood narrative, tears reportedly swim into his eyes. His heartbeat quickens, the room spins. At that moment, modern science, personal emotion, and ancient longing collapse into one breathless instant. The walls are murmuring again, this time in the hushed rotunda of a Victorian institution. Translations proliferate. Each carries the lull of its era, lofty Victorian cadence, modernist sparseness, post-structural reverberation. Yet each translator pauses in the same scene, Gilgamesh's return to the city, and each time, the hush of realization settles anew. The hero's greatest monument was always his people's craft, not his own exploits. The epic persists because generations find themselves mirrored there, imperfect, ambitious, bruised by the knowledge that they must one day die, yet eager to hammer meaning into whatever material lies close at hand. Tonight, as you prepare to rest, imagine that you, too, reach out to touch a single brick. The clay is glazed with moonlight. Under your fingers, the grooves align to the pad of your thumb, as though the ancient mason shaped it just for you. Imagine the wall carries the temperature of so many sunsets that it still radiates a gentle warmth, a soft pulse. If you lean closer, you may even sense, on the faintest edge of hearing, syllables of cuneiform turning over like far-off waves. They speak of cedar forests and lion hunts, of grief and cedar resin, of journeys beyond the mountains where the sun rests at night, and of the simple reassurance of standing once more upon familiar ground. Why does this quest for meaning still resonate? Because it never promises perfection, only participation. Gilgamesh fails to secure the plant of immortality. The serpent sheds its skin and slithers away. Yet failure does not cancel significance. Instead, it reveals a subtler immortality, one made of stories told beside hearth fires, whispered across library shelves, streamed through glowing screens, or murmured softly as loved ones drift toward sleep. We may not live forever, but we may add one more finger's width of clay, one more fragile tablet, one more page or pixel to the swelling chorus. In that sense, every listener tonight in every corner of the world becomes a scribe. Your dreams will mix with the hero's dreams. Tomorrow you might reshape them, retell them, or simply carry them like a small, luminous stone in your pocket. When you wake, perhaps the very act of stepping into morning light will feel like passing through Uruk's gate, an invitation to labor well, love well, and honor the mortal span allotted to you. And now, as night deepens and the distant stars draw their own cuneiform across the sky, we arrive at the quiet farewell of our series. 10 chapters have unrolled like tablets across the inner shelf of your imagination. We have walked beside Gilgamesh through tyranny and kinship, through forests and fairies of death, through grief's keen blade and wisdom's gentle balm. We have lingered at tavern doors, crossed cosmic waters, and rested beneath the branches of a tree older than kings. At each pause, we reminded ourselves to breathe slowly, to let the cadence of ancient syllables lull the clamor of modern days. So, dear listener, yes, you who nestles now beneath blankets or watches moon-pale curtains drift, it is time to close the library once more. Let the dust settle upon the tablet racks. Let the torches gutter down to red embers. The walls of Uruk will stand guard over the city of your thoughts until dawn. If worries attempt to scale them, picture each brick answering in a calm, measured voice. All is well, the story is being tended. Thank you for keeping vigil with us at the Hearth of Heroes, for lending your heartbeat to drums that sounded millennia ago. May your sleep be unbroken, your dreams rich with cedar scent and river mist, and your waking full of quiet wonder. The epic may end, but the murmur continues in every rhythmic breath you take. Rest now, traveler. Let the final torch go out. Beyond the ramparts, the night wind is singing its wordless lullaby. Within, the walls speak softly, 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 until even words dissolve into silence and the gentle, enduring hum of being alive.